Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. Please just give us a few minutes while we wait for others to join in. Okay, we can get started now. Hello everyone and welcome to today's virtual tour of the Timken Museum. We're so excited to have you with us this morning. And a few housekeeping things before we get started. Please keep yourselves muted throughout today's presentation, and if you have any questions, please feel free to use the Zoom chat function by clicking the button at the bottom of your screen that says chat in order to type your question. We'd be happy to address any questions or comments at the end of today's tour. If you're joining us over from Facebook Live, welcome to you as well. You can also ask any questions you may have using the comment section on Facebook, and we'll be monitoring those comments and answering those questions at the end of the tour as well. Lastly, this tour is being recorded and streamed live and will be posted to our social media channels once the tour is over. If you would like to rewatch this tour or watch other tours put on by the Timken Museum previously, please check out our YouTube or our Facebook pages to find those. Without further ado, I'm so excited to introduce Eleanor, who will be presenting on Bruegel's Peasants. Thank you so much for being with us today, and I'll turn things over to you, Eleanor.
Thank you. Thanks, Jose. Okay, good day, and welcome to today's virtual tour of the Timken Museum. My name is Eleanor Merle, and today I'll be talking with you on the topic of Bruegel's Peasants. Pieter Bruegel the Elder became known as Peasant Bruegel owing to one of the main features of his work, the centrality of the Dutch peasantry. Bruegel is generally considered the greatest Flemish painter of the 16th century, the first in a family of artists that extended into the 18th century. He was born in about 1525 and established himself as a painter in Antwerp. He later married and settled in Brussels, where he created landscapes and peasant scenes unrivaled in European art. He explored biblical, allegorical, and mythological subjects with equal enthusiasm, excelling in social satire that exposed the weakness and foibles in humankind. His pictures for wealthy patrons were highly individual, depicting peasant life in a sophisticated way. His works show Flemish commoners with erudite and often subversive references to poetry, philosophy, politics, and religion. His veiled artistic criticism of the Catholic Habsburg Empire were such that before his death, he instructed his wife as to which of the paintings she should destroy for her own safety. Now, before we go any further, I'm going to answer the one question everyone has about Bruegel, which is, how exactly do you spell his name? Is it with an H or without an H? So if there's nothing else you remember from today's presentation, I think you may remember this. I found it pretty interesting. Well, truth is, it's both spellings. Bruegel signed his name both ways. And in his early career, there were other spellings beside those two main ones, but there's more. It's not just a matter of how it's spelled, because there's also the matter of how Bruegel styled his signature. Is it lowercase in italics? Is it uppercase with all sorts of idiosyncrasies thrown in for good measure? I'll provide what's likely the most plausible explanation. In reality, Pieter Bruegel willingly played around with how to spell his own name. In early works from the 1550s, we find him using variants on the spelling that contains the H. You can see it, I know it's rather light, but the first block, the upper block on the slide, Brueghel, with often in italics. But in 1559, he decided to adopt, with greater consistency than before, the now more familiar form, which is what you see at the bottom. And the U looks like a V, but the H is eliminated. So it's usually uppercase, sometimes with the U and the E in ligature, in other words, combined. And that pesky H is now eliminated. Now, it's stating the obvious, but what this shows us is that Bruegel couldn't make up his mind when it came to spelling his name and signing his works. Up until 1559, that is. For from that date, he went as Bruegel without the H in caps. And the reason for this change is a simple one. The bottom spelling and format has a more Latinate feel than the decidedly Dutch Bruegel with an H and its variants. The signature change was, in other words, about cultivating a particular image, the Latinizing or Latinization of the name, signaling the artist's social, cultural, and intellectual pretensions. So, with that diversion, back to our story. Bruegel, importantly, was one of the first generations of artists to grow up when religious subjects had ceased to be the dominant subject matter of painting. As a result of the Protestant Reformation, the traditional art patrons, the church, and people buying art for the church disappear. Rather, Bruegel was patronized mainly by scholars, wealthy businessmen, and connoisseurs, and was on friendly terms with some of the most prominent humanists of the Netherlands. These social classes become the new consumers of art, desiring paintings that say something about their world. Now, as mentioned earlier, Bruegel's scope of subject matter was vast. One of the earliest signed Bruegel works is the Timken's Parable of the Sower from 1557. While not one of his peasant paintings, I'd be remiss if we didn't at least acknowledge its importance in Bruegel's oeuvre. The Parable of the Sower is what might be called a world landscape, a construct that combines spectacular elements of European landscape viewed from an elevated viewpoint. Bruegel left Antwerp in 1553 to study in Italy, and he returned with drawings of the French Alps, which influenced the detail and aerial perspective of the landscape in this work. The narrative depicts a peasant in the left foreground sowing seeds, or Christianity's message. Jesus preaches to a small group in the distance on the banks of a river that leads the eye into the background. A rugged mountain range reaches toward heaven, offering a magnificent path to eternal salvation. Brilliantly, Bruegel selected Jesus's first parable as the subject for his own inaugural landscape painting, a work that planted the seed for his own affinity with landscape. So now we're ready to get back to Peasants. Now, it was only in the last 3 years of his life that Bruegel focused on scenes of peasant life. From his paintings, we come to understand more about village life of this time and about the peasants who inhabited them, how they ate, how they dressed, how they hunted, and how they relaxed and celebrated. His portraits were a great source of evidence regarding both the physical and social aspects of 16th century life in the Netherlands. As such, he came to be known as Peasant Bruegel. A final comment before taking a look at our first peasant work. Art historians and scholars differ in their interpretations of Bruegel's works. Are they caricatures, or do they carry a moralizing message? I'll offer suggested interpretations as we proceed and leave it to you in the end to make up your own mind. Now we're going to begin with 3 works which are considered by many art historians to constitute a series. And those paintings are called Peasant Wedding, Wedding Dance, and Peasant Dance. They were all done during the last 3 years of his life, 1566 to 69. So let's start by seeing what Bruegel has to say about a typical 16th century peasant wedding. The wedding banquet is shown taking place in a barn in autumn with huge walls of hay stored in the background. In front of the hay is a long table with the wedding party. The furnishings are a parody of a rich landowner's hall. In place of a finely woven tapestry, an old blanket hangs from the wall behind the bride. The wooden tables and chairs are roughly fashioned, while an old door has been taken off its hinges to serve as a banqueting tray. The main foods on offer appear to be bread, porridge, and soup. On the yellow back wall, which is the neatly trimmed bales of hay, hang the crossed sheaves of grain secured by a rake, a common sign of autumn harvest celebrations and fertility. Clearly, the harvest has been good. The painting is dominated by the consumption of food and drink. Almost every guest seems to be focused on eating. Even one of the bagpipe players stares in anticipation in the direction of the food servers. Certainly, no one appears to be interested in the spiritual nature of the occasion. If we follow the figure at the end of the table, who's passing the dishes to the wedding guests, we're led to the true protagonist, the bride. She sits quietly, not conversing with anyone, but smiling faintly, her cheeks flushed, her eyes half closed, her hands clasped demurely before her on the table. Instead of the hat that everyone else in the painting is wearing, she wears a simple wedding tiara, interleaved with flowers suggesting virginity. Her long auburn hair hangs loose. From now onwards, her hair will be cut and confined as befitting a married woman. Her passivity is understandable. It was custom for the bride to do nothing on her wedding day. It was at least one holiday in a lifetime of hard labor. Now, we're not sure who the woman to the left of the bride is, perhaps her mother. To this woman's left, seated in a high-backed chair, is the notary, the legal observer of the wedding. To his left, we can see a Franciscan monk who is there probably to confer a religious blessing for the marriage. He's speaking to a man who's elegantly dressed in black and may be the landowner, the lord of the manor. However, some art historians believe that this fashionably dressed man may be a self-portrait of the artist himself. There are in existence some engravings portraying Bruegel that bear a resemblance to this man and that may give weight to support this hypothesis. But where's the bridegroom? He's not sitting next to his betrothed. As I mentioned, she has women on both sides of her. You can only just see the white headdress of the one on the bride's right, which we noted could possibly be her mother. According to some sources, there was a custom for the bridegroom not to actually attend the wedding feast at all, or rather, not attend before dark. Another claimed custom was that he had to attend, but also had to assist in the serving of food and drink. On that basis, he could be the man pouring the beer in the bottom left corner, and his normal seat could possibly be the unoccupied place on the bench at the end of the table at right. Or he may be the red-capped man twisting round to take the plates of food from the tray. Or he may be the white-aproned man carrying the table tray in the foreground, whose face is compositionally linked to the bride's face. The answer is we don't know where the bridegroom is. So from discussing someone who seems to have been misplaced, we now pass to something that seems to have, we now pass to something that seems to have been added. Look at the red-clad servant on the right carrying the tray, and the man twisting to pass the plates to the table. Most viewers assume that the twisting man is sitting, that the dark brown patch underneath his arm is his left leg, and that his foot visible under the tray, which is circled in yellow, is his left foot. No. Viewers are then left with the conundrum that Bruegel seems to have given the red-clad servant 3 feet. The third foot is circled red. Is this a joke by the painter or a huge error? Clearly, Bruegel's son, Bruegel the Younger, thought it was an error, or at best, too confusing for viewers. In his 1620 copy of his father's painting, he solves the problem simply by eliminating the third foot altogether. Now, in the left foreground, a man is refilling a seemingly endless number of jugs, and a child is shown sucking his finger, a traditional symbol of hunger. The latter may have been a veiled reference to a famine, which had occurred recently in Flanders. The drink being poured is likely beer. This is Flanders, what is now Belgium, and it makes great sense because beer is made from grain, the very material that is so much part of the life of these peasants. They're growing it, harvesting it, and here they're participating in a wedding that's taking place on the thrashing floor. Unfortunately, nothing is known about the commissioning of this work, which is probably Bruegel's most famous. If we knew more, it might help resolve the controversial question of whether the painting is intended to be a caricature or carry a more moralizing message. So the second in our series of peasant works is the Peasant Dance, which depicts the scene right after this one, right after the peasant feast. Now, this work is at the Detroit Institute of the Arts, and it has an interesting provenance. It was acquired by the museum in 1930, when the director at the time was on his annual tour of Europe with museum patrons. And in the back hallway of a stately English home, he came across a painting which through the dirt and varnish, he immediately recognized as the original of the wedding dance, of which there were many different copies. He was so sure and so excited that he called back to the Arts Commission in Detroit and asked for permission to buy the painting right there on the spot. In an extraordinary act, the commission wired the director the money, and he purchased the work for a paltry price because it was assumed to be a copy, and he got this original work. The work is particularly intriguing for its spatial complexity. It depicts 125 wedding guests. The feast is completed, and the guests are now out in the open dancing. To show this massive, wonderful humanity, Bruegel takes a bird's eye view so that he can get as many people in as possible, rather than being at ground level. The front of the picture is defined by an abandon to human instincts, with no regard whatever for the solemn aspects of a wedding. The sin of lust is at issue. Any number of elements in the work, from the salacious bagpipes on the right and the frank cod pieces of the men, to the kissing couple, and in fact to the entire theme of the dance, either have or could be adduced to make this point. The unrestrained enjoyment of life, the energy, the dancing, music, and sexual freedom are all a clear statement of resistance to the political and religious control of the Dutch people to the Spanish Empire at this time. Dancing was tabooed at this time by the authorities and the church, and the painting can be seen as both a critique and comic depiction of a stereotypical, oversexed, overindulgent peasant class of the times. Although a modern audience might see this panel primarily as a genre painting, Bruegel's contemporaries would have noted its moralizing overtones. Frenzied dance and lustful behavior could lead to sin and damnation. Now, at the picture's center, we see the joined hands of the bride and groom dancing in the open air. Dressed in black with her red hair loose, the bride is the only woman without a white headscarf and the working woman's apron. Note that white dresses only became fashionable in the 19th century. The bride's mother and groom's mother are sitting at a table in the far right. Now notice the lone man in the extreme right foreground wearing a black cap, looking down with a very slight smile on his face. Because he's alone, some scholars say that this is in fact Bruegel himself looking at the world in a sort of wry attitude. This is the favored position, but there's also a lone man in a red cap on the left leaning against a tree, and no one has identified him. Bruegel celebrated the deep-seated traditions of Dutch culture in this work, highlighting the threat by Catholic Spain's King Philip II. This very worldly picture would have been frowned upon by the church, as it disapproved of dancing in any obvious sensuality and joy in life. So we're now ready to take a look at the last in Bruegel's series of 3 scenes of peasant life, the peasant dance from 1568. First, a trivial alert. This painting was looted by Napoleon Bonaparte and brought to Paris in 1808, but it was returned to Vienna in 1815. The work depicts the country fair's opening dance, which involved a traditional leaping dance initiated by 2 pairs of couples that preceded the general dance. The fair was called a kermesse. The large couple in the foreground appear to be hurrying to the dance as the bagpipe player starts the music, whilst we observe further back 2 other couples lost in the joys of the dance. Notice the spoon in the brim of the foreground man's hat. In typical Bruegel style, The lively peasant scene provides the viewer with a glimpse of social history. Each figure in peasant dance is caught in action, feasting, drinking, dancing, chatting, possibly about to fight. The figures running toward the center of the picture in particular provide a real sense of life and movement within the piece. But there is more. Bruegel has once again put a moral slant on this scene. This is not just a humorous picture recording village life. Some have argued that the deadly sins are all depicted within the painting somewhere, with greed, gluttony, and lust being the most prominent. The tavern's prominence in the foreground makes it clear that the people are preoccupied with material rather than spiritual matters. Bruegel also draws our attention to the fact that although this is a saint's day, he's depicted the dancers having turned their backs on the church and take little notice of the picture of the Virgin which hangs from the tree. Notice the man seated next to the bagpipe player. He looks drunkenly at the bagpipe player, trying to offer him a jug of ale. See how he has a peacock feather in his hair, symbolic of vanity and pride. Is this a condescending view by Bruegel or simply a humorous one? An animated conversation between three men is taking place at the table on the left. One of them stretches out his hand to another on the extreme left, but probably due to an excess of alcohol, he knocks his neighbor in the face. And notice the arm of a beggar reaching across the table. Finally, notice the two strange figures in the left foreground, which appear to be two small females. They've been described as a mother and child, even though the size of one seated would be completely wrong. However, it should be noted that children often dress like smaller versions of their parents, and these could be two children. This excellent work of art has been the inspiration for Bruegel Belgian Amber Ale from Brewery van Steenberg. The 5.2% alcohol by volume beer has a scene from the peasant dance on the label. So you see, Bruegel is still making his mark on today's society. We've seen in these three peasant paintings how Bruegel uses common scenes of festivities in rural life to convey moral messages about the state of peasant society, as well as political statements. We're now ready to deviate a bit with a fascinating work called The Land of Cockaigne, in which Bruegel expands the universe he chooses to observe and comment on. Now, in medieval times, Cockaigne was a mythical land of plenty, a dreamlike Garden of Eden where no one needed to work for a living. Food and drink arrived in an endless stream of ready-to-eat supplies. Pieter Bruegel's depiction of the land of Cockaigne is perhaps the most renowned. He represents this never land as a place where everything is done for the inhabitants and all there is to do is sleep. His view of Cockaigne and its residents is not meant to be a flattering one. He chooses rather a comic illustration of the spiritual emptiness believed to derive from gluttony and sloth, two of the 7 deadly sins. In the painting, moving counterclockwise, a soldier in the 11 o'clock position, a farmer, and a scholar lie dozing on the ground underneath a table bound to a tree. Their arrangement suggests the men as the spokes of a wheel, where the tree is a hub. The slight inclination of the dining table indicates that the food placed on it gradually slides into the mouths of the 3 men lying on the floor without effort on their part. And just take a notice of that half-eaten egg running from the scholar toward the farmer. Now, on closer look, we see the soldier in red coat with his armor and lance at his feet, the farmer sleeping on his flail, and the scholar lying on the ground, all three with obviously bulging bellies. Only the scholar, identified by his fur-lined coat and the inkwell attached to his belt, still seems to ponder near the closed book. But his arms crossed under his head and the writing underneath him next to the book indicate that he will not put his thoughts on paper. These workers have no need for their tools. Instead, they lie almost stupefied. Now, moving to the upper right quadrant, we see a man still with a spoon in his hand is crawling out of a sticky mess. The path to this paradise is arduous, as you first have to fight on your way through a mountain of viscous mush. Having eaten his way through it, he reaches for the bent branch of a tree in order to lower himself into cocaine. A ready-to-eat goose lies upon a silver platter. A roasted pig runs with a knife already stuck in its appetizing rind, and a cactus-like tree consists of flat cakes. All the delicacies shown emphasize the idea of availability at all times. On the left, a knight emerges from a lean-to whose roof is covered in dishes of pie and pastry with an open mouth, waiting for a roasted pigeon to fly in. And I know you don't see the roasted pigeon because it was accidentally removed during restoration work, but I wanted to let you know that it had been intended by Bruegel. Now, one art historian has argued that the painting is a political satire directed at the participants in the first stages of the Dutch Revolt, which was really the 80 Years' War from 1568 to 1648, where the roasted fowl represents the humiliation and failure of the nobleman who otherwise would form the fourth spoke of the wheel in his leadership of the Netherlands. And the overall scene depicts the complacency of the Netherlandish people, too content with their abundance to take the risks that would bring about significant religious and political change. Clearly, it shows a breakdown in societal classes, as the three figures would not have moved in the same circles. I think we're now ready for a bit of a challenge, which we'll encounter with Bruegel's painting, The Beggars, also known as The Cripples, from 1568. It's a small but powerful painting, which has continued to puzzle art historians to this day. The Beggars, or The Cripples, is a small but powerful painting which perplexes with its ambiguous meaning. At first glance, the beggars seem to have an air of madness. They throng the sunlit courtyard of a hospital built of red brick and are about to disperse to begin their begging. A woman in the background clutches her begging bowl. One of the figures wears bells around his stump like a jester. The fact that the figures are depicted beside a wall which opens out to a view of the countryside may reflect their position on the fringe of society. Many theories have been put forward to explain Bruegel's image, but none have been fully proven. Why are these three beggars so grouped? Why are they so curiously dressed? What can be the meaning of the hanging foxtails pinned to their clothes? There's much interesting subtext, but only some can be explained. Scholars have suggested the scene may allude to Coppermaandag, the annual beggars' feast day on the Monday after Epiphany. Like carolers at Christmas, the beggars would sing and collect alms. Now, the beggars likely represent different classes, as indicated by their hats. The king wears a cardboard crown, the bishop a mitre, the soldier a tall cylindrical military cap, the bourgeoisie a beret, and the peasant a cap. The work clearly has some political message. Can it have something to do with the beggars' revolt? Because on April 5th, 1566, 200 Calvinist nobles called themselves the beggars, and they rode through Brussels to present a petition of grievances to Margaret of Parma, who was regent for the Habsburg Emperor Philip II. The two chief grievances were taxation and a demand for greater local autonomy. Some scholars have supposed the foxtails to be a symbol of these lords who revolted against the Spanish occupation, and they were called the Jeux. Is Bruegel announcing sympathy for the beggars? Do the lowly cripples representing different classes represent some sort of ailing society about to be upturned? Bruegel is likely satirizing the contemporary political situation. Nonetheless, is he obliquely mocking the disabled by suggesting the social classes are as foolish as cripples? Though the full meaning of this picture may be lost, the composition mesmerizes to this day. Now, whatever the meaning is behind Land of Cockaigne, this iconic image is yet another of Bruegel's wonderful and almost surreal depictions of society as seen through his eyes. We'll wrap up today's tour with Bruegel's proverb painting, a classic amalgamation of literature and art. Bruegel's intense imagination of the moral and spiritual ideas of his time gives the work its timeless validity. As we've seen in all our works today, his intent was not just to illustrate the proverbs, but to unmask human folly and the dangers of folly which lead to sin. The Netherlandish proverbs dating from 1559 has been known by different titles over the centuries. It was originally named the Upside Down World. It's also been known as the Dutch proverbs, the Blue Cloak, and the Topsy-Turvy World. The picture brings together over 100 proverbs and idioms that are identified in the English language, some of which are still in popular use. It depicts their figurative representation in a comprehensive spatial setting that is as real as the people's behavior. The individual scenes are played out side by side without being directly dependent on each other. A village near the sea provides a spacious stage for the apparently everyday tasks of its inhabitants. The background for all the varied activity is made up of a farmhouse, dilapidated huts, a stone bridge with pillory and tower, the village square at the center of the activity, and a farmstead among cornfields near the wood. In the distance is the open sea, shining in the sun of a late summer's day. The proverbs are hidden in the landscape that is sometimes grotesque, but highly imaginative. So let's take a look. The upside down world is depicted in the upper right left by the globe, which is standing on its head. We live in a world in which nothing is as it should be. It's turned upside down when nothing is in place and happens exactly the opposite way. The wise sayings are evidence of man's folly and sinfulness in a crazy world that has turned away from God. Also in the upper left, to lead each other by the nose is to fool each other. The Blue Cloak, the painting's original title, is featured in the center of the piece. The wife puts the blue cloak on her husband, meaning she is cheating on her partner. To confess to the devil, which is in the middle of the work, means to share secrets with our foes. To tie a flaxen beard to the face of Christ is to hide your sins under the name of religion and God. To be unable to see the sunshine on the water is to be jealous of others' success. To be a pillar biter is to perform sins under the cover of religion. In other words, to be a hypocrite. To play on the pillory in the upper middle of the painting is to attract attention to one's shameful and foolish acts. And to bang your head against a brick wall is to try to achieve the impossible. This proverb painting is a classic amalgamation, as we said, of literature and art. Bruegel's intense imagination of the moral and spiritual ideas of his time gives this work its timeless validity. Our tour has now come to a close. I think you'll agree that Bruegel was a unique and visionary painter, offering us vivid depictions of the people and society of his time. His works continue to enthrall and excite us to this day as they challenge us to consider the context in which they were created and their meaning to us today. I welcome any questions or comments.
Thank you so much, Eleanor, for such a fascinating and engaging tour. And yes, we would be happy to take any questions now.
This is Dee Dee. I just wanted to say that what strikes me on seeing these, the Bruegel works, he does not make pretty people. The faces are terrible. They're not attractive. You don't feel like you like these people. And so he really doubles down on the irony and the satire that he's depicting with the faces, I think.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, we have some views over from Facebook. And yes, go ahead if you have comments or questions.
I have a question about the wedding dance. I wonder if you have any insight as to what the museum director from Detroit saw that made him think that it was an original versus a copy.
I'm afraid I don't know. The couple of resources I saw on this, and actually he did a video. He does a video talking about the piece, and he simply says that it was apparent to him. So how much of a Bruegel scholar he is, I don't know. And I don't really know what the copies look like. So, it's difficult to know if it, would have been apparent to anyone really familiar and knowledgeable about Bruegel's works. Thank you for that question. Good question.
And Deborah says, in general, I don't think peasants were considered beautiful people in the comments.
Mm-hmm.
And Mary Catherine says, interesting and informative, and thank you so much. Eleanor, I actually wanted to ask, because we spent a lot of time working on this presentation, if you happen to know if Bruegel's descendants and family had a similar painting style. I know not all of them did, but
the two sons who were very young when Bruegel died, Jan the Elder and Bruegel the Younger, Peter Bruegel the Younger, they both did many copies of his works. And from my reading, scholars agree that they did not, neither one of them reached the level of expertise that Bruegel depicts, represents. But their works are in many museums. So you just have to be careful. That's why I went through the discussion of how they spell their name. You can be pretty sure what you're looking at when you see the all caps, with the V. The descendants put the H back in. The two sons put the H back in.
Both of them. That's so fascinating. Okay, and Deborah asks, how did you narrow down to just these few works to discuss?
Well, I started off with, Peasants. I mean, his work is so vast, landscapes, mythological works, spiritual works. You could choose any one of those genres. So I started with Peasants, and that led me to the series of the three. And then there really weren't other peasant paintings like those three. So I selected three that I thought would be interesting, to the audience, which, have a lot of information we could talk to as to who the characters were. Some of his works are so busy and filled with information that they don't even lend themselves that well to presentation.
Yes, they're very different from our Timken's parable of the sower, who
Yes.
which Deborah actually, I think earlier said that is one of her favorite works of all time when it came on earlier. Okay. Okay, so if that's all for today, before you go, I'd like to remind everybody that this tour and other tours put on previously through the Timken Museum can be found on our social media channels, our Facebook or YouTube page. And if you'd like further information for future tours, please check out our website events calendar for those details. And thank you again for joining us this morning. And thank you once again, Eleanor, for a wonderful presentation. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you.